There is a place where the ground ends, where certainty dissolves into something vast and unknowable. A boundary that once marked the limit of everything our ancestors understood about survival, about safety, about the world itself. For most of human history, this boundary was not crossed lightly. It was not explored with wonder. It was avoided, feared, respected in the way you respect something that could erase you without noticing you existed at all. We're talking about the ocean. But not the ocean as you might think of it now. Not the blue expanse you see in travel videos or nature documentaries. Not the romantic sunset backdrop or the playground for surfers and sailors. We're talking about the ocean as it existed in the mind of early humans. The ocean as a living question mark. The ocean as the ultimate unknown. And here's what's strange. Here's what pulls you in if you let it. Every single person alive today carries the genetic memory of that fear. Somewhere deep in the architecture of your brain, in the parts that evolved long before language, before tools, before fire, there is a whisper that says, "Be careful near the edge. Don't go too far into the water. The deep is dangerous. You might not feel it consciously. You might love swimming. You might dream of sailing across oceans, of diving into coral reefs, of living on a beach. But the echo is there. And if you've ever stood at the edge of the sea at night, when the water is black and the horizon disappears, when you can't tell where the world ends and the void begins, you've felt it. That small tightening in your chest. That ancient voice saying, "Turn back. This is not for you." So let's ask a question that seems simple but opens into something vast. Why did early humans fear the ocean? And more than that, why did it take us so long to overcome that fear? Why did we, a species that learned to hunt animals 10 times our size, that crossed frozen tundras and scorching deserts, that invented language and art and fire, why did we hesitate for tens of thousands of years before truly engaging with a thing that covers 70% of our planet? The answer is not what you think. It's deeper than drowning. It's older than culture. It's woven into the very shape of how we became human. Pause for a moment. Think about the last time you saw the ocean. Really saw it. Not glanced at it from a car window or scrolled past it on a screen, but stood before it, fully present, watching the waves collapse into themselves over and over, listening to that rhythm that predates music, that predates sound as we understand it. Did you feel small? Did you feel, even for a second, that you were looking at something that existed on a scale your mind couldn't quite hold? Now imagine you had never seen a boat. Imagine you had no concept of navigation, no understanding of tides or currents, no knowledge that land existed beyond the horizon. Imagine you had watched people walk into that water and simply disappear. Not die in a way you could understand. Not killed by a predator you could see. Not starved by a drought you could comprehend. But erased. Swallowed by something that gave no explanation, no body to bury, no story to tell except they went into the water and the water kept them. That was the ocean to early humans. Not a resource, not a frontier. Limit. The place where the world ended. We need to go back, far back, to a time before maps, before cities, before agriculture reshaped the entire planet in humanity's image. We need to go back to the moment when our ancestors first encountered the ocean not as an idea, but as an immediate physical reality. A wall of water that moved and breathed and roared. A thing that was neither land nor sky, that followed no pattern you could predict, that took and gave nothing back that you could understand. But to truly grasp why the ocean terrified us, we need to understand what we were when we first saw it, what shaped us, what evolution had built into our bodies and brains over millions of years in environments that were nothing like the coast. Because fear is not random. Fear is information. Fear is your ancestors whispering across time. This killed us. Be careful. Humans evolved in East Africa. This is not speculation. This is written in our bones, in our DNA. in the chemical signatures of ancient soils and the fossilized footprints pressed into volcanic ash 3.6 million years ago. We came from savannas and woodlands, from places where the horizon was visible, where threats could be seen approaching, where water meant rivers and lakes. Contained, comprehensible, finite. Our brains, our bodies, our entire sensory apparatus evolved to navigate that world. We learned to read the subtle movements in tall grass that meant predator. We learned which plants were food and which were poison. We learned to track animals across vast distances by interpreting prints in dust, by understanding the language of disturbed earth and broken twigs. We became the most sophisticated pattern recognition machines the planet had ever produced. We learned to see things that weren't there yet, to imagine the future, to plan, to ask, what if? But all of that sophisticated machinery, all of those millions of years of evolution, all of that learning was calibrated for land, for earth beneath your feet, for a world where cause and effect followed rules you could eventually understand. You could learn to predict where the antelope would go. You could learn to avoid the lion's territory. You could learn to find water by watching birds, to find shelter by reading the sky. The ocean followed none of these rules. The ocean was chaos pretending to be water. Think about what it means to look at the ocean from the perspective of a brain designed for the savannah. First, there is no edge you can see. The horizon line exists, yes, but it promises nothing. Could be 10 miles away. Could be infinite. Your brain has no reference point for that kind of distance. Second, there is no pattern you can learn. The waves come in, they go out, they change size and speed and direction according to forces you cannot see. Wind you cannot predict, moon phases you don't understand, underwater topography you cannot imagine. Third, there is no escape route. On land, even in the most dangerous situation, you can run. You can climb. You can hide. In water, especially deep water, especially if you cannot swim well, there is only the water itself. And the water is everywhere. This is important. This is key. Fear is not irrational when it's based on accurate assessment of danger. And for early humans, the ocean was objectively, undeniably dangerous in ways that made it unlike any other environment we had encountered. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about what the ocean actually does to a human body. Not in abstract terms. In visceral, immediate, physiological terms. Because this is where the fear becomes embodied. This is where it moves from concept to instinct. When you enter the ocean, several things happen simultaneously. The water is cold. Even in tropical regions, even in warm seas, the water temperature is almost always significantly lower than your core body temperature. This triggers an immediate mammalian dive reflex. Your heart rate slows, your peripheral blood vessels constrict, your body begins the process of protecting your vital organs at the expense of your extremities. This is automatic. This is not something you control. Your body recognizes, on a level deeper than thought, that you have entered an environment where survival is now uncertain. The water is dense, about 800 times denser than air. This means every movement requires more energy. Swimming is exhausting in a way that walking never is. And if you are not a strong swimmer, and early humans by and large were not, then every moment in the water is a negotiation with exhaustion. How long can you keep your head above the surface? How long before your muscles give out? How long before the choice is taken from you? The water is opaque. You cannot see what is beneath you. Your brain, trained by millions of years to gather visual information about threats, is suddenly operating blind. Anything could be below. Anything could rise up. And in fact, many things did. Jellyfish, stingrays, saltwater crocodiles in some regions, wolves. A bestiary of creatures specifically adapted to an environment where you are hopelessly, fundamentally outmatched. And then there are the currents, the undertow, the rip tides, forces that can pull you away from shore faster than you can swim back, that can drag you under without warning, that operate according to a physics you cannot perceive and therefore cannot predict. On land, you understand gravity. You understand friction. You understand that if you walk in one direction, you will move in that direction. In the ocean decides where you go. But here's what's truly terrifying, truly humbling about all of this. Even if you understand these dangers intellectually, even if you've studied oceanography and fluid dynamics and marine biology, even if you know exactly why the water behaves the way it does, you are still, when you enter the ocean, operating in an environment that does not care about your understanding. The ocean is indifferent to your knowledge. It will drown a marine biologist as easily as it drowns a child. Makes no distinction. It offers no mercy. Early humans understood this. Not scientifically, not academically, but in their bodies, in their survival instincts, in the stories they told about the people who went into the water and didn't come back. Yet, despite all of this, despite every evolutionary reason to avoid the ocean, to stay on land, to stick to the rivers and lakes where water was manageable and small and contained, humans eventually did move toward the coast, did establish settlements by the sea, did learn to harvest its resources, to navigate its surface, to build entire cultures around its rhythms. Why? What changed? What made us overcome a fear so deeply rational, so thoroughly justified by every metric of survival we possessed? The answer is not singular. It's not one breakthrough moment or one technological innovation. The answer is gradual, complex, and reveals something profound about what it means to be human. Because the story of humans and the ocean is not really a story about conquering fear. It's a story about need, about desperation, about the point at which staying in place becomes more dangerous than moving into the unknown. Let's go to the archaeological record. Let's look at the physical evidence of when and where humans first began to engage with coastal environments. Not as travelers passing through, but as residents. As people who made the deliberate choice to live at the edge of the water. The earliest confirmed coastal settlements we have found date back approximately 160,000 years. Sites in South Africa, places like Pinnacle Point and Blombos Cave. These are not just camps. These are sustained habitation sites, places where humans lived for generations, where they developed specific technologies for harvesting marine resources, where they adapted their entire way of life around the presence of the ocean. And the timing is crucial, because 160,000 years ago, the world was in the grip of a severe glacial period. The climate was cooler, drier, harsher than it had been for millennia. The inland regions where humans had thrived were becoming less hospitable. Game was scarcer. Plant resources were diminishing. The savanna that had shaped us, that had been our home for millions of years, was contracting, becoming less able to support our populations. So we moved, not because we wanted to, not because we had overcome our fear of the ocean through courage or curiosity. We moved because we had to, because the alternative was starvation, because the ocean, for all its dangers, offered something the dying inland could not: food. Reliable, abundant, renewable food. Think about that. Think about what it means. The thing we feared most, the thing every instinct told us to avoid, became the thing we depended on for survival. This is the human story in miniature. This is what we do. We adapt. We learn. We overcome. Not because we are brave, but because we are desperate. Because we are resourceful. Because we will do whatever it takes to survive, even if it means walking directly into the thing that terrifies us. But adaptation is not instant. Learning is not automatic. The transition from land-based hunter-gatherers to coastal dwellers was slow, painful, and written in the bodies of people who made mistakes, who misjudged the tide, who went out too far, who didn't understand the warning signs of changing weather. Every piece of knowledge we eventually gained about the ocean was paid for in lives, in children swept away, in adults who ventured too deep and never returned, in entire families caught in storms they didn't know how to read. The archaeological sites tell us this. At Blombos Cave, researchers have found shells with holes worn through them, strung as beads, ochre for decoration, sophisticated bone tools, evidence of symbolic thinking, of culture, of art. These were not primitive people stumbling through survival. These were humans as cognitively advanced as anyone alive today, as intelligent, as capable of complex thought. And yet they lived at the margin of the ocean with a wariness that is visible even in the archaeological record. Their settlements are never right at the water's edge. They're elevated, to back, positioned to have visual access to the shore but protected from storm surges, from high tides, from the unpredictable violence of the sea. Their tools for harvesting shellfish are careful, specialized, designed to minimize time spent in the water. They took from the ocean what they needed, but they did not embrace it. They did not dive into its depths or venture far from shore. They treated it with the respect you give to something powerful and unknowable. And this pattern repeats. Everywhere humans colonized coastal regions, around the Mediterranean, along the coasts of Asia, in Australia, in the Americas, the pattern is the same. Initial settlements are cautious, conservative, positioned to access marine resources while minimizing exposure to marine dangers. Takes thousands of years, sometimes tens of thousands of years, before humans begin to truly engage with the ocean. Before we build boats capable of open water. Before we develop navigation techniques. Before we start to see the ocean not as a barrier but as a highway. Australia is a perfect case study. Humans arrived in Australia at least 65,000 years ago, possibly earlier. To get there, they had to cross significant stretches of open water. Even during the ice ages, when sea levels were lower and more land was exposed, there was no land bridge to Australia. Getting there required boats, required navigation, required a level of ocean engagement that seems to contradict everything we've said about fear and avoidance. But look closer. The crossings were almost certainly accidental at first. People pushed out to sea by storms. Groups fleeing conflict or following resources who found themselves on improvised rafts or log platforms, carried by currents to shores they never intended to reach. The peopling of Australia was not a planned expedition. It was a series of desperate accidents that happened to result in colonization. And once there, for tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal Australians developed rich coastal cultures, sophisticated understanding of marine environments, deep relationships with the sea. But even then, even after millennia of living by the ocean, the dominant narrative in Aboriginal stories about the sea is one of respect tinged with danger. The ocean is a place of power, a place where spirits dwell, a place that must be approached with proper knowledge and proper ritual, or it will take you. This is universal. Every coastal culture, no matter how intimately connected to the ocean, maintains stories about its danger. The Greeks had Poseidon, temperamental and violent. The Norse had the Kraken. Polynesian cultures, perhaps the most sophisticated ocean navigators in human history, had elaborate systems of knowledge about reading waves and stars, but also deep taboos about certain waters, certain times, certain conditions when the ocean became too dangerous to engage with. The ocean, in other words, never stopped being feared. We just learned to manage the fear, to work within it, to develop the knowledge and tools that allowed us to extract resources while respecting the fundamental truth that the ocean could kill us at any moment. And here's what's profound about that. Here's what should make you pause. We have been living with the ocean, working with the ocean, depending on the ocean for at least 160,000 years. We have developed technologies that allow us to cross it, to dive deep beneath its surface, to map its floor, to harvest its resources on industrial scales. We have submarines that can reach the deepest trenches. We have satellites that can measure its temperature from space. We have computer models that simulate its currents with stunning accuracy. And yet, the ocean still kills us, regularly, predictably, without malice and without mercy. Experienced sailors drown. Beaches that seem safe turn deadly. Tsunamis rise from nowhere and erase entire coastlines. The ocean remains, even now, even with all our technology and all our knowledge, something fundamentally beyond our control. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami killed more than 230,000 people in a single day. Most of them had lived their entire lives on the coast. Most of them had sophisticated understanding of their local marine environment. And it didn't matter. The ocean acted according to its own laws. Tectonic plates shifting beneath the seafloor, energy transferring through water in ways that are perfectly predictable in theory but impossible to escape in practice. And human knowledge, human preparation, human technology made almost no difference. This is not meant to be morbid. This is meant to be honest. The ocean is dangerous. It was dangerous to early humans, and it is dangerous now. The fear our ancestors felt was not ignorance. It was pattern recognition. It was millions of years of evolution correctly identifying a threat that could not be defeated, only managed. But let's shift perspective. Because fear is only part of the story. Danger is only part of the truth. To understand why humans eventually embraced the ocean, why we built boats and learned to navigate and developed entire civilizations dependent on maritime trade, we need to understand what the ocean offered. What made it worth the risk? The ocean is the largest source of protein on the planet. This is not hyperbole. 70% of Earth's surface is water, and almost all of that water contains life. Fish, shellfish, crustaceans, mollusks, marine mammals, fluid, a density of biomass that no terrestrial environment can match. For early humans living on the edge of starvation, living in environments where game was scarce and plant resources were unreliable, the ocean represented abundance on a scale they had never encountered. And not just abundance. Reliability. Shellfish don't migrate. They don't hide. They don't run away. If you know where a mussel bed is, it will be there tomorrow. It will be there next week. It will be there next year. You can return to it again and again, harvesting what you need without the uncertainty of the hunt, without the danger of pursuing large game, without the vagaries of seasonal plant growth. This matters more than you might think. Food security is the foundation of everything else in human development. Art requires surplus calories. Technology requires time to experiment. Social complexity requires stability. If you are spending every waking moment trying to find enough food to survive until tomorrow, you cannot build culture. You cannot innovate. You cannot think about anything beyond immediate survival. The ocean, for all its dangers, offered something that allowed early coastal humans to move beyond bare subsistence. It offered the possibility of surplus, of storing food, of having enough that you could share, could trade, could use to support non-productive members of the community. The elderly, the injured, the children who needed years to develop before they could contribute. The shell middens we find at ancient coastal sites are not just garbage dumps. They are evidence of sustained caloric surplus. They represent thousands of meals, thousands of days when people had enough to eat, enough to survive, enough to think about things other than hunger. And here's what happens when humans have enough food. We start to think. We start to experiment. We start to ask questions. Why does the tide come in and go out? What determines when fish appear in large schools and when they disappear? What are those lights in the night sky? And do they have any relationship to the behavior of the ocean? What happens if you take this shell and sharpen it against a stone? What happens if you hollow out a log and see if it floats? What happens if you venture just a little bit further from shore? Innovation is born from security. And the ocean, paradoxically, provided the security that allowed humans to begin innovating the technologies and knowledge systems that would eventually allow us to truly engage with it. The first boats were almost certainly not boats as we think of them. They were probably logs, bundles of reeds, animal skins stretched over wooden frames, improvised platforms that could hold one or two people and keep them out of the water just long enough to reach a fishing spot or a shellfish bed that was inaccessible from shore. And every single one of those early watercraft represented an enormous leap of faith. Because you're betting your life that this thing you've made, this arrangement of natural materials held together by cord or resin or sheer hope, will continue to function in an environment that is actively hostile to its existence. The water wants to penetrate your boat, wants to saturate the wood, the reeds, the skins, wants to make them heavy, wants to pull them apart, wants you to sink. The first people who climbed onto those improvised boats and pushed away from shore were not conquering fear. They were managing it. They were making a calculated risk that the potential reward, food, resources, escape from predators or enemies on land, was worth the very real possibility of death. And many of them died. We don't have records of those deaths. We don't have names or stories. But we know they happen because they still happen. Because even with modern boats, with life jackets and radio communication and GPS and rescue services, people drown, boats sink, the ocean takes, but enough people survived. Enough boats worked well enough, long enough, that knowledge accumulated. The design improved. People learned which materials worked better, which shapes were more stable, how to read the water, to understand when it was safe to venture out and when it was better to stay on land. And slowly, over thousands of years, the relationship changed. The ocean was still dangerous, but it was no longer only dangerous. It was also opportunity. It was also connection. It was also, for some cultures, identity. Let's talk about the Polynesians. Because if any people in human history truly overcame the primordial fear of the ocean, it was them. The Polynesian expansion across the Pacific is one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. And it happened without metal tools, without compasses, without any of the navigation technology that Europeans would later depend on. Starting around 3,000 years ago, Polynesian navigators began deliberately sailing into the open Pacific, searching for new islands, new land, new resources. They crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes, guided only by their knowledge of stars, of wave patterns, of bird flight, of subtle changes in watercolor and temperature that indicated the presence of land beyond the horizon. This was not accidental. This was not people getting lost and happening to find islands. This was intentional exploration. Planned expeditions carrying not just people but also the plants and animals needed to establish settlements. Pigs, chickens, taro, breadfruit. Everything required to replicate Polynesian society on whatever new land they discovered. Think about what that means. Think about the level of ocean knowledge required. To sail out of sight of land, into waters you've never seen before, with no guarantee that there is anything out there at all, requires a mastery of the marine environment that is almost incomprehensible. You have to understand currents well enough to use them for propulsion and navigation. You have to understand stars well enough to maintain direction across weeks of travel. You have to understand the behavior of birds, of fish, of winds, of waves. And you have to trust all of this understanding enough to bet your life on it. To bring your family onto a boat and sail into the horizon. The Polynesians did this. They settled Hawaii. They settled Easter Island. They settled New Zealand. They created a cultural sphere that spanned an area larger than any empire that would exist until the age of European colonial expansion. And they did it all by developing such intimate knowledge of the ocean that it stopped being the enemy and became, instead, the medium through which they define themselves. But even the Polynesians never lost the respect. Never forgot that the ocean was dangerous. Their navigation knowledge was sacred, passed down through rigorous training, protected and preserved because losing it meant death. Their stories are full of voyages that went wrong, of navigators who misread the signs and were lost, of the ocean as a testing ground where only the knowledgeable, the skilled, the properly prepared could survive. And here's the thing. Here's what brings us back to the beginning. The Polynesian relationship with the ocean is the exception, not the rule. Most human cultures, for most of human history, treated the ocean as a boundary, as the edge of the world, as something to be avoided if possible, engaged with carefully if necessary, but never fully trusted. The ancient Egyptians, despite living along the Nile and depending entirely on its flooding cycles, rarely ventured into the Mediterranean. They built boats for the river, but they let the Phoenicians do the ocean sailing. The early Chinese developed sophisticated river navigation and canal systems, but largely avoided the open ocean until much later in their history. Even the Greeks and Romans, famous for their maritime cultures, lost significant portions of their fleets to storms, to navigational errors, to the simple fact that the ocean does not care about human ambition. The ocean remained, for almost all of human history, the place where certainty ended, the place where human control broke down. The place that reminded us again and again that we are small, fragile, temporary. And that brings us to a deeper question. A question that sits beneath all of this history, all of this archaeology, all of this evidence of human struggle and adaptation. Why does the ocean affect us the way it does? Not just practically, not just in terms of survival, But emotionally, psychologically, why does standing at the edge of the ocean create that particular feeling of smallness, of awe, of something approaching existential vertigo? Part of it is scale. The ocean is the largest continuous environment on Earth. Larger than any desert, any forest, any mountain range. It stretches beyond the horizon in every direction, and your brain has no way to process that. You evolved to understand bounded spaces, territories with edges, landscapes you could map in your mind. The ocean refuses to be mapped at a human scale. Simply goes on. Part of it is depth. When you look at the ocean, you're looking at a surface. But beneath that surface is a volume of space that dwarfs any terrestrial environment. The Mariana Trench is deeper than Mount Everest is tall. If you placed Everest at the bottom of the trench, its peak would still be more than a mile underwater. And that's just one trench. The average depth of the ocean is about 2.5 miles. 2.5 miles of water, of pressure, of darkness, of life forms adapted to conditions you cannot survive for even seconds. Part of it is time. The ocean is old. Older than mountains. Older than continents in their current configuration. The Pacific Ocean has existed, in some form, for hundreds of millions of years. Long before humans. Long before mammals. Long before anything you would recognize as life on land. When you look at the ocean, you're looking at something that predates everything you think of as permanent. But there's something else. Something harder to articulate. The ocean moves. Constantly. Relentlessly. Even when it appears calm, it is moving. Currents flow beneath the surface. Tides pull and push according to the gravity of the moon. Waves form from winds thousands of miles away, travel across entire ocean basins, and break against shore with energy that has been building for days. This movement is not random, but it's also not something you can control or predict with complete accuracy. The ocean is a chaotic system in the mathematical sense, governed by deterministic laws but so sensitive to initial conditions that long-term prediction becomes impossible. A butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world can, in theory, influence weather systems on the other side of the planet. The ocean is where that chaos lives, where it becomes visible, where it becomes something you can feel in your body as the ground beneath your feet stops being stable and starts moving with the rhythm of something vast and indifferent. Early humans understood this without the mathematics. They understood it because they felt it. Because they watched the ocean change from calm to violent in hours. Because they saw the tide line shift and couldn't explain why. Because they experienced the ocean as something alive. Not in a biological sense, but in the sense of being animated by forces they could not see and therefore could not prepare for. And that's terrifying, because humans survive by understanding patterns, by learning cause and effect, by building mental models of how the world works and using those models to predict the future. The savannah taught us this. If you understand the patterns of animal migration, you can position yourself where the animals will be. If you understand the patterns of plant growth, you can return to the same places year after year and find food. If you understand the patterns of predator behavior, you can avoid becoming prey. The ocean disrupted all of that. The ocean said, "There are no patterns you can learn completely. There are forces at work you cannot see. You can develop knowledge, you can develop skill, but you can never develop certainty. Every time you engage with me, you are taking a risk. And sometimes you will lose." This is why the ocean appears in mythology and religion across every coastal culture. It's why it's personified as gods, as spirits, as entities with intention and mood. Because the ocean behaves like something with agency, gives and takes, it nurtures and destroys. It seems to respond to human action but never in entirely predictable ways. You can make offerings, perform rituals, follow every safety protocol, and still the ocean might kill you, or it might not, and you will never know for certain which it will be. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. In almost every other domain of life, humans have achieved some level of mastery. We've cured diseases. We've split the atom. We've sent machines to other planets. We've mapped the human genome. We've built cities that house millions. We've created technologies that would seem like magic to anyone living even 100 years ago. And yet we cannot control the ocean. We cannot stop a tsunami. We cannot prevent a hurricane. We cannot even guarantee that a ship, built with the most advanced engineering we possess, will make it safely from one port to another. Every year ships sink. Every year people drown. Every year. The ocean reminds us that our mastery is provisional, conditional, limited. And on some deep level we know this. We carry the knowledge in our bodies. In the way our breath quickens when a wave larger than expected rolls in. In the way we instinctively move back from the water's edge when the surf is high. In the way we dream of drowning, of being pulled under, of losing our grip on the solid world and being taken into the formless deep. These are not learned fears. These are ancient fears. These are the fears that kept your ancestors alive long enough to have children, who had children, who had children, in an unbroken chain stretching back to the moment the first humans stood at the edge of the ocean and felt small. And here's where it gets strange. Here's where the question shifts from historical to existential. Because in the modern world, most people will never face the ocean as early humans did. Most people will never depend on it for survival. Most people will engage with it, if at all, as recreation, as vacation, as something pretty to look at from a safe distance. But the response is still there. The feeling is still there. You can be someone who has never seen the ocean in person, who has lived your entire life landlocked, and still when you finally stand before it, you will feel something. Oh yes, beauty yes, but also something else. Something quieter. Something that might be recognition. You are looking at the thing your ancestors feared. The thing that killed them. The thing that also saved them. The thing that is both the end of the world and the beginning of the unknown. And in that moment, you are connected to every human who has ever stood in that same place, feeling that same feeling, asking that same silent question. What is out there? What happens if I go in? What am I looking at when I look at the horizon and see only water? The ocean is the last truly wild place on Earth. Not wild in the sense of being untouched by humans. We've polluted it, overfished it, altered its chemistry and temperature through climate change. But wild in the sense of being ultimately beyond our control, beyond our full understanding, beyond our ability to make safe. You can learn everything there is to know about the ocean. You can get a PhD in oceanography, spend decades studying currents and marine biology and ocean chemistry. You can memorize every species of fish, every type of coral, every pattern of wave formation. And none of that will guarantee your safety if you fall into the water far from shore, if you're caught in a rip current, if a storm rises faster than you can sail to safety. The ocean doesn't care about your degree. It doesn't care about your experience. It doesn't care at all. And that's the final piece. That's what sits at the bottom of the ancient fear. The evolutionary wariness, the cultural mythology. The ocean is indifferent, not hostile, not malevolent, indifferent. It will kill you not because it wants to, but because you made an error, because conditions changed, because the laws of physics and fluid dynamics operated exactly as they always do and you happened to be in the wrong place when they did. There is no negotiating with indifference. There is no appeasing it. There is no ritual or sacrifice or prayer that will change the fundamental nature of what the ocean is. A massive, moving, chaotic system that existed long before you and will exist long after you and does not notice your existence at all. Early humans understood this. Not intellectually, not scientifically, but in their bones, in their survival instincts, in the stories they told around fires, when the night was dark and the sound of waves was the only thing between them and silence. They understood that the ocean was the edge, the boundary, the place where human meaning dissolved into something larger and emptier and more powerful than anything they could fight or flee from. And so they feared it, rationally, appropriately, with the kind of fear that is actually respect. The kind of fear that says, I acknowledge that you are greater than me. I acknowledge that you can erase me. I will approach you carefully, take what I need, and never forget what you are capable of. That fear saved them, kept them alive, allowed them to extract resources without being destroyed, allowed them to build boats without being reckless, allowed them to develop the knowledge that would eventually enable human civilization to spread across the entire planet, using the ocean not as a barrier but as a highway. But the fear never went away, just went underground, into the subconscious, into the cultural memory, into the part of you that knows, even if you've never articulated it, that the ocean is different, that it requires respect, that it will take you if you're not careful. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that fear is worth keeping, not as a limitation but as a reminder that we are small, that there are forces in the world that dwarf us, that mastery is an illusion and control is temporary, and the universe does not arrange itself around human comfort or human survival. The ocean teaches humility. It taught it to the first humans who encountered it, and it teaches it still to anyone willing to pay attention. To stand at the edge of the water and look out at the horizon and feel the ancient whisper, "Be careful. This is not for you. This is bigger than you." Let's come back to the coast, to the specific places where humans first made the decision to stay, to build lives at the margin between land and sea. 'Cause these places are still here. You can visit them. You can stand where your ancestors stood tens of thousands of years ago and look at the same ocean they looked at. The coastline has changed. Sea levels have risen and fallen, the geography has shifted, but the ocean is the same. The waves break with the same rhythm. The tide comes in and goes out according to the same lunar pull. The horizon still offers the same impossible promise. There is more. Always more. More than you can see. More than you can know. The caves at Pinnacle Point in South Africa overlook the Indian Ocean. You can visit them. You can stand in the same spaces where humans lived 160,000 years ago, where they cracked open mussels and cooked them over fires, where they crafted tools and created art and buried their dead. And you can look out at the water and try to imagine what they felt. Did they wonder what was out there? Did they dream of crossing it? Did they tell stories about what lived beneath the surface? Did they have a concept of other lands, other people, other worlds beyond the horizon? Or was the ocean simply the edge? The end? The place where thinking stopped because there was nothing more to think about? We don't know. We can't know. They left no written records, no detailed accounts of their emotional lives. What we have are shells and bones and stone tools and the burnt remnants of fires. We have evidence of survival, of adaptation, of cultural complexity. But we don't have their thoughts. We don't have their fears expressed in language we can understand. But we have ourselves. We have our own response to standing at the edge of the ocean. And if we pay attention to that response, if we let ourselves feel what arises without immediately explaining it away or rationalizing it into nothing, then maybe we can catch a glimpse of what they felt. A glimpse of the original encounter between human consciousness and the vast indifferent deep. Fear, yes, but also curiosity, also wonder, also the strange exhilaration that comes from encountering something so much larger than yourself that your problems, your worries, your entire existence suddenly seem small. Not insignificant, not meaningless, but small, held within something bigger. Something that was here before you and will be here after you and doesn't require anything from you except acknowledgement. This is what the ocean offers. This is what it has always offered, even when it was taking lives, even when it was destroying boats, even when it was swallowing entire villages in tsunamis. It offers perspective. It offers scale. It offers a reminder that you are part of something larger, something older, something that operates according to laws you did not write and cannot change. Early humans needed that reminder less than we do. They were surrounded by forces beyond their control. By weather they couldn't predict, by predators they couldn't always escape, by diseases they couldn't cure. The ocean was just one more thing in a world full of things that could kill them without warning. But we've changed the world. We've built structures and systems that shield us from most of those ancient dangers. We've created the illusion of control. We've made cities where the weather doesn't matter, where predators don't exist, where food appears on shelves regardless of season, where turning a dial makes the temperature exactly what we want it to be. And in doing so, we've lost something. We've lost the daily, immediate understanding that we are fragile, that we are temporary, that we are small. The ocean gives that back. Not by hurting us, not by threatening us, just by being what it is. By existing at a scale and with a power that no amount of human engineering can match or contain. And maybe that's why people still go to the ocean. Not for vacation, not for recreation, but for something else, something harder to name. To stand at the edge and feel the fear their ancestors felt. To let themselves be small for a moment. To acknowledge that there are still wild things in the world. Still forces that don't care about human ambition or human plans. Still places where you can go and be reminded that you are an animal on a planet, not a god in a machine. Think about the sound of waves. There's a reason that sound is used for meditation, for sleep aids, for relaxation. It's not because it's pleasant exactly. It's because it's constant, repetitive, eternal. It's the sound of something that has been happening for millions of years and will continue happening for millions more. It's the sound of time on a scale your mind can't fully process. And listening to it, really listening, pulls you out of your small concerns, your immediate worries, your human scale problems, and places you in contact with something vast and ancient and ongoing. Your ancestors heard that same sound. Stood on different beaches, in different bodies, with different knowledge and different tools, but heard the same rhythm. The same endless collapse and renewal. The same promise and threat. And they made the same choice you're making when you stand at the water's edge. They chose to stay. To take what they could. To respect what they couldn't control. To live in the presence of something that could kill them but also feed them. That could erase them but also define them. And from that choice, from that decision to live at the margin, came everything else. Came the development of boat-building technology. Came the navigation knowledge that would eventually allow humans to cross oceans. Came the trade networks that would connect distant civilizations. Came the exchange of ideas and genes and cultures that would shape the modern world. But it started with fear. Rational, appropriate, life-preserving fear. The kind of fear that makes you careful. That makes you learn. That makes you respect the power of the thing you're engaging with. And it started with need. With hunger. With the pressure of survival forcing humans to overcome that fear. Not by ignoring it, but by working within it. By learning to read the signs. By developing the knowledge that would allow them to take what they needed from the ocean without being destroyed by it. This is the human story. This is what we do. We find ourselves at the edge of something impossible, something that every instinct says to avoid, and we figure out how to engage with it anyway. Not fearlessly. We never do anything fearlessly. Fear is information. Fear keeps us alive. But we learn to act in spite of fear. To move forward with it, carrying it with us, letting it make us careful but not letting it make us paralyzed. The ocean taught us this. Maybe more than any other force in nature. The ocean taught us how to be brave without being stupid. How to be ambitious without being arrogant. How to push boundaries while respecting limits. Because the ocean has limits that cannot be pushed. Has boundaries that cannot be crossed with willpower alone. Has laws that apply regardless of how much you want them not to. You cannot hold your breath indefinitely. You cannot swim faster than a current. You cannot survive in water that is too cold for too long. These are not challenges to overcome. These are facts to accept. And learning to accept them, learning to work within them rather than against them, is what allowed humans to eventually thrive in coastal environments. But thriving is not the same as conquering. Thriving is not the same as mastering. Even now, even with all our technology, we have not conquered the ocean. We have learned to navigate it better. We have learned to predict its behavior more accurately. We have learned to extract its resources more efficiently. But we have not conquered it. We cannot conquer it. The very idea is absurd. The ocean is too large, too powerful, too old, too indifferent. And that's okay. In fact, that's essential. The ocean serves as a permanent reminder that there are things in the universe that are not about us, that do not exist for our benefit, that do not arrange themselves according to our needs or desires. This is a hard truth for modern humans to accept. We've spent the last few thousand years reshaping the planet to suit ourselves. We've cleared forests. We've diverted rivers. We've flattened mountains. We've turned deserts into farms and swamps into cities. We've extended human dominion over almost every ecosystem on Earth. Except the ocean. The ocean remains, largely unchanged at its fundamental level. Still dangerous, still wild, still operating according to its own rules. And standing before it, you feel that. You feel the presence of something that predates human civilization, that predates humanity entirely. You feel the weight of deep time, the pressure of vast space, the reality of forces beyond your control. And if you let yourself really feel it, really sit with it, it changes something in you. It recalibrates your sense of scale. It reminds you that your life, for all its importance to you, is brief. That your problems, for all their urgency, are small. That you are one temporary arrangement of matter and energy on a planet that is itself one temporary arrangement in a universe full of them. This is not depressing. Or it doesn't have to be. Can be liberating. Because if your problems are small, then your mistakes are small too. If your life is brief, then each moment becomes more precious, not less. If you are one temporary thing among countless temporary things, then you are connected to all of it, part of the same vast system of becoming and dissolving and becoming again. The ocean teaches this, has always taught this. To anyone willing to stand at the edge and listen. To anyone willing to feel the fear and the wonder and the strange calm that comes from accepting your place in the order of things. Early humans felt this. They had no choice. They lived too close to the edge. Too close to death. Too close to the raw forces of nature. They couldn't afford illusions of permanence or control. We can afford those illusions. For a while. We can build walls thick enough that we forget what's outside them. We can create environments so controlled that we forget we're animals. We can spend our entire lives without ever confronting something truly beyond our power to influence. But the ocean is still there, waiting. Not for us, not with any intention, but there, constant, available, ready to remind us if we let it of what we are, of where we came from, of the long chain of ancestors who stood at the same edge and felt the same fear and made the same choice. To stay, to learn, to adapt, to survive. You carry their DNA. You carry their survival strategies. You carry the neural pathways that kept them alive in an environment that could kill them at any moment. And when you stand at the edge of the ocean, some part of you remembers. Some ancient part that predates language, that predates culture, that is written not in your conscious mind but in your body's automatic responses. Your heart rate changes. Your breathing changes. Your posture changes. You become alert in a way you're not alert in safe, controlled environments. You scan the horizon. You listen to the sound of the waves. You watch the waterline. You're gathering information about a potential threat, even if you have no intention of entering the water, even if you're perfectly safe where you are. This is your ancestors speaking. This is millions of years of evolution doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keep you alive in the presence of danger. And the ocean is danger. Will always be danger. Not because it's evil or because it wants to hurt you, but because it is powerful and you are fragile, and those two facts will never change no matter how much technology you possess or how much knowledge you acquire. This is the final lesson. This is what we take away from the long history of humans and the ocean. There are forces in the world that are simply greater than we are. Forces that were here before us and will be here after us. Forces that shape the planet and the climate and the conditions of life itself. And we do not control them. We can study them. We can learn to predict them better. We can develop technologies that make us safer in their presence. But we cannot control them. And any attempt to pretend we can control them is foolish, dangerous, a failure to learn the lesson that the ocean has been teaching us for hundreds of thousands of years. Respect what is greater than you. Learn from it. Take what you need. But never forget what it is capable of. This is how early humans survived. This is how they built coastal settlements that lasted for millennia. This is how they eventually developed the knowledge and technology that would allow their descendants to cross oceans, to discover new continents, to create a truly global human civilization. They respected the ocean. They feared it appropriately. And they learned to work with it rather than against it. And we would do well to remember that. In our age of climate change and rising sea levels and increasingly violent storms. In our age of industrial fishing and ocean pollution and dying coral reefs. In our age when we have more power to affect the ocean than any generation in human history, but still no power to control it. The ocean is rising, slowly, measurably, in response to changes we have made to the atmosphere, to the climate, to the temperature of the planet. The ocean is absorbing heat and carbon dioxide. It is becoming more acidic. It is changing in ways that will reshape coastlines, that will alter weather patterns, that will affect every human who depends on it for food or transportation or climate regulation. And we cannot stop this. Not quickly. Not easily. The forces we have set in motion will continue for decades, for centuries, regardless of what we do now. The ocean will keep rising. The chemistry will keep changing. The storms will keep intensifying. Because the ocean does not care about our intentions, does not care about our regrets, does not care about our plans to fix what we've broken. It responds to physics, to thermodynamics, to the laws that govern how heat and water and atmospheric gases interact. And those laws are not negotiable. So we are back at the beginning, back at the edge, back at the place where certainty ends and the unknown begins. Our ancestors stood here when the climate was changing and the inland was dying, and they had to choose between staying in the familiar danger or moving toward the unfamiliar one. They chose to move. They chose to engage with the thing they feared. And it saved them. We're being asked to make a similar choice now. Not to move toward the ocean, but to change how we relate to it. To stop treating it as an infinite resource. To stop treating it as a dumping ground for our waste. To stop pretending we can keep taking and taking and taking without consequence. The ocean is teaching us again the lesson it has always taught. You are small. Your power is limited. Your time is brief. Act accordingly. And maybe, if we listen, if we let ourselves feel the appropriate fear, the appropriate respect, the appropriate humility, maybe we can learn what our ancestors learned. That you can survive at the edge. That you can thrive in the presence of something greater than yourself. But only if you acknowledge what it is. Only if you respect its power. Only if you never ever forget that it can take everything from you in an instant. The ocean is still there. Still moving. Still breathing its slow, massive breath. Still operating according to laws older than language, older than thought, older than anything we think of as human. And we are still standing at the edge. Still feeling the fear. Still making the choice. The only question is whether we'll make it wisely. Whether we'll carry the ancient knowledge forward. Whether we'll remember that the ocean is not ours to control, only to live beside, to learn from, to take from carefully, to give back to when we can. Whether we'll remember that we are small and temporary, and connected to something vast, and that's okay. That's how it should be. That's what it means to be human on a water planet. Standing at the edge of the thing that covers most of the world, that made the world habitable, that controls the weather and the climate and the very air we breathe. The ocean is the origin, the context, the condition of possibility. And we feared it because we understood it. Because we saw it clearly. Because we didn't make the mistake of thinking we were bigger than we are. That fear was wisdom. And maybe it still is. The waves keep coming. They've always kept coming. They'll always keep coming. Long after we're gone. Long after everything we've built has crumbled. Long after the last human has drawn the last breath. The waves will keep breaking. The tide will keep turning. The ocean will keep being exactly what it has always been. Powerful. Indifferent. Eternal. And that's okay. That's how it should be. We are small. And the ocean is large. And somewhere in that relationship, in that ancient, ongoing negotiation between the fragile and the powerful, between the temporary and the permanent, between the fearful and the feared, somewhere in there is something true about what it means to be alive. Something worth remembering. Something worth carrying forward. Something our ancestors knew, standing at the edge 160,000 years ago, watching the water, feeling the fear, and staying anyway. 'Cause they had to. 'Cause they were human. 'Cause that's what we do. We stand at the edge of the impossible and we find a way to survive. Not fearlessly. Never fearlessly. But bravely. With the fear held close, respected, honored, and used as information rather than barrier. With the knowledge that we are small and mortal and temporary. With the acceptance that there are things greater than us. With the humility to ask for what we need without demanding more than we should take. With the wisdom to know the difference. The ocean taught us that. Still teaching us. If we're willing to listen. If we're willing to stand at the edge and feel what our ancestors felt, if we're willing to be small for a moment, to let the vastness in, to remember, the waves keep coming. Listen, the sound doesn't change. That's what gets you if you really pay attention. The sound of waves breaking on shore is the same sound it was yesterday. The same sound it was 1,000 years ago. The same sound it was when the first human looked at the ocean and didn't have a word for what they were seeing. This is continuity on a scale we don't usually think about. Everything else changes. Languages evolve. Empires rise and fall. Technologies transform the world beyond recognition. The landscape shifts. Mountains erode. Rivers change course. Forests become deserts, become grasslands, become forests again. But the ocean keeps making the same sound. And there's something profoundly strange about that. Something that should make you pause. Because it means that the ocean is not like the other things we interact with. It's not shaped by human time. Doesn't operate on human scales. It exists in a different temporal dimension entirely, where change happens so slowly across such vast periods that from our perspective it might as well not be changing at all. Except it is changing. Always. The water you're looking at right now is not the water that was there a moment ago. Every wave is unique. Every molecule of water is in constant motion, cycling through currents that span entire oceans, rising into the atmosphere as vapor, falling as rain, flowing through rivers back to the sea. The ocean is not a static thing. It's a process. A vast, planetary-scale circulation system that never stops, never rests, never repeats exactly. And yet it appears unchanging, feels eternal, sounds the same century after century. This is the paradox at the heart of water. It's both the most dynamic and the most consistent substance on Earth. Takes every shape but has no shape of its own. It flows around every obstacle but cannot be compressed. It seems soft but can cut through stone given enough time. It gives life but can take it in seconds. Early humans understood water. They had to. Water meant survival. Knowing where to find it, how to store it when the rains would come. These weren't academic questions. These were life and death. And they became very, very good at reading water. At understanding how it moved through landscapes, how it collected in certain formations, how plants and animals and weather patterns all connected to its presence or absence. But the ocean was different. The ocean was water on a scale that broke all the rules they had learned. It was water that didn't flow anywhere. Water that didn't dry up in drought. Water you couldn't drink. Water that moved in ways that had nothing to do with the terrain, that responded to forces invisible and incomprehensible. The moon, the wind, underwater topography miles below the surface, temperature differences you couldn't perceive. It was water, but it was also something else. Something that defied the category. Something that required new language, new concepts, new ways of thinking. And we still struggle with this. We still use words that don't quite fit. We call it the sea as if it's a single thing, when actually it's thousands of interconnected systems. We talk about the Pacific and the Atlantic as if these are separate entities, when really it's all one continuous body of water, arbitrarily divided by human naming conventions. We say someone drowned as if the ocean did something active, when really the ocean did nothing, just was. And the person couldn't be in it and continue breathing. The ocean's indifference is so complete that it doesn't even register the presence of a struggling human. This linguistic struggle reveals something deeper. We don't have good conceptual frameworks for things that are simultaneously one and many, for things that are everywhere and nowhere, for things that have no boundary but are clearly distinct from not water. The ocean breaks our categories, and categories are how we think, how we organize reality into manageable pieces, how we make sense of the world. The ocean resists making sense of. You can study oceanography for decades and still be surprised by it, still find new phenomena, still discover that something you thought you understood actually works differently than you believed. The ocean is complex in a way that might be fundamentally irreducible. There might not be a simple model, a clean theory, a unified framework that explains everything about how it works. And early humans, lacking the scientific method, lacking the tools to measure and quantify and test hypotheses, had no hope of understanding it in a systematic way. They could observe. They could notice patterns. They could develop practical knowledge about local conditions. But they couldn't explain why the tide came in twice a day. Couldn't explain why the water was salty. Couldn't explain where the ocean ended or what lived in its depths. So they did what humans do when faced with powerful forces they don't understand. They made stories. They created myths. They populated the ocean with beings that had intention, that could be appeased or angered, that gave the chaotic behavior of water the structure of narrative. And this wasn't primitive thinking. This wasn't ignorance or superstition in the sense we usually mean those words. This was sophisticated psychological technology, because you can't navigate uncertainty without some framework for understanding it. And if the framework can't be scientific, if you don't have the tools or methods or conceptual language for science, then it has to be narrative. Stories do something that raw observation cannot. They give meaning to events. They create continuity between past and future. They encode practical knowledge in memorable form. They provide emotional and psychological tools for dealing with fear. If the ocean is just a mass of water governed by incomprehensible forces, then drowning is random, meaningless. There's nothing you can do about it except avoid the water entirely. But if the ocean is ruled by Poseidon, by Yamoja, by Tangaroa, by any of the hundreds of ocean deities that human cultures have created, then drowning is not random. It's the result of having offended the deity, or failed to make the proper offerings, or violated a taboo. And that means there are things you can do to protect yourself. Rituals to perform, rules to follow, ways to earn favor or at least avoid wrath. This is psychologically essential. Humans cannot function in the face of pure randomness. We need to believe that our actions matter, that there's some connection between what we do and what happens to us. Even if that belief is based on a flawed model of reality, it allows us to act, to make decisions, take risks, to engage with dangerous environments rather than fleeing from them entirely. So the ocean deities served a purpose. They allowed humans to approach the ocean with a framework for understanding it, with rules and rituals and stories that encoded real practical knowledge. Don't go out in certain weather, don't fish in certain seasons, respect the power of storms, wrapped in narrative form that made it memorable and meaningful. And here's what's interesting. Here's what should make you reconsider the easy dismissal of primitive beliefs. Many of those rules, those taboos, those ritual restrictions, they were accurate. They kept people safe. Not because the gods were real in a literal sense, but because generations of observation had been encoded into religious practice. If the local deity says you must not fish during the full moon in this particular bay, and everyone follows that rule, and everyone survives, then the rule is working. It doesn't matter whether the rule works because the deity will punish you if you break it, or because the tides during full moons in that bay create dangerous currents that have killed people in the past. The outcome is the same. The knowledge is preserved. The community survives. This is what we've lost, in some ways, in the transition to scientific thinking. We've gained precision. We've gained the ability to explain mechanisms. We've gained power over natural forces that would have seemed godlike to our ancestors. But we've lost the embedding of knowledge in story. We've lost the emotional weight of ritual. We've lost the community practice of passing down survival information in forms that are meaningful, memorable, and motivating. You can tell someone that the rip current at a particular beach is dangerous because of the underwater topography and the angle of the waves. And they might remember that intellectually. They might even believe you. But if you tell them a story about the spirit that lives in those waters, that takes one person every 7 years, that can only be avoided by swimming parallel to shore if you feel the pull, they'll remember that. They'll feel it. They'll act on it. This is not an argument against science. This is an argument for understanding that humans are not purely rational creatures. We're story creatures. We're meaning-making creatures. We respond to narrative and emotion and ritual in ways that pure information cannot activate. And the ocean, more than almost any other natural force, requires that kind of respect. That kind of emotional weight. Because the ocean is dangerous in ways that intellectual knowledge alone cannot prepare you for. You can know that hypothermia will kill you in cold water. You can know the exact physiological mechanisms. You can know how many minutes you have at different temperatures. But until you've felt your body shutting down in cold water, until you've experienced the way your muscles stop responding and your thoughts become sluggish and the panic gives way to a strange calm that is actually the beginning of death, until you've felt that, you don't really know. The knowledge is abstract, theoretical, not embodied. The stories, the rituals, the taboos, they were ways of embodying knowledge, of making it felt, of ensuring that people approached the ocean with appropriate fear, even if they'd never personally experienced the worst it could do. Because most people who experienced the worst of what the ocean could do didn't survive to pass on that knowledge. So the knowledge had to be transmitted culturally, had to be given weight beyond personal experience, had to be made sacred in the original sense of that word, set apart, treated with special seriousness, hedged around with rules and consequences. And this worked. For thousands of generations it worked. Coastal communities survived. They learned to take what they needed from the ocean without losing so many people that the community couldn't sustain itself. They developed sustainable fishing practices, sophisticated navigation techniques, deep understanding of local marine ecology, all embedded in religious and cultural frameworks that made the knowledge powerful enough to be preserved. Then we invented science. And we started to explain the ocean in different terms. Terms that were more accurate in some ways, more predictive, more generalizable across different environments, but also more abstract, more divorced from emotional reality, more dependent on intellectual understanding rather than embodied wisdom. And we've gained a lot from that. We've gained the ability to predict tsunamis, to understand climate patterns, to map the ocean floor, to track the movements of marine life across entire ocean basins, to develop technologies that make ocean travel safer, fishing more efficient, research more comprehensive. But we've also lost something. We've lost the cultural transmission of appropriate fear. We've lost the rituals that enforced respect. We've lost the stories that made the ocean's danger feel real to people who hadn't experienced it directly. And so now we have tourists who go swimming in conditions that would have terrified their ancestors. We have people who venture onto beaches during storms to take pictures. We have industrial fishing operations that treat the ocean as an infinite resource, that take and take and take without the cultural frameworks that once enforced sustainable practices. We have forgotten, in some deep way, what the ocean is. We've stripped away the mythology and the ritual, and we think we've replaced it with something better. With rational understanding, with scientific knowledge, with technological mastery. But the ocean doesn't care about our knowledge, doesn't care about our technology. And the fear our ancestors felt, the fear that kept them alive, that fear was accurate. It was appropriate. It was, in the deepest sense, wise. And this wasn't primitive thinking. This wasn't ignorance or superstition in the sense we usually mean those words. This was sophisticated psychological technology. Because you can't navigate uncertainty without some framework for understanding it. And if the framework can't be scientific, if you don't have the tools or methods or conceptual language for science, then it has to be narrative. Stories do something that raw observation cannot. They give meaning to events. They create continuity between past and future. They encode practical knowledge in memorable form. They provide emotional and psychological tools for dealing with fear. If the ocean is just a mass of water governed by incomprehensible forces, then drowning is random, meaningless. There's nothing you can do about it except avoid the water entirely. But if the ocean is ruled by Poseidon, by Yamoja, by Tangaroa, by any of the hundreds of ocean deities that human cultures have created, then drowning is not random. It's the result of having offended the deity, or failed to make the proper offerings, or violated a taboo. And that means there are things you can do to protect yourself, rituals to perform, rules to follow, ways to earn favor or at least avoid wrath. This is psychologically essential. Humans cannot function in the face of pure randomness. We need to believe that our actions matter, that there's some connection between what we do and what happens to us. Even if that belief is based on a flawed model of reality, it allows us to act, to make decisions, take risks, to engage with dangerous environments rather than fleeing from them entirely. So the ocean deities served a purpose. They allowed humans to approach the ocean with a framework for understanding it, with rules and rituals and stories that encoded real practical knowledge. Don't go out in certain weather, don't fish in certain seasons, respect the power of storms, wrapped in narrative form that made it memorable and meaningful. And here's what's interesting. Here's what should make you reconsider the easy dismissal of primitive beliefs. Many of those rules, those taboos, those ritual restrictions, they were accurate. They kept people safe. Not because the gods were real in a literal sense, but because generations of observation had been encoded into religious practice. If the local deity says you must not fish during the full moon in this particular bay, and everyone follows that rule, and everyone survives, then the rule is working. It doesn't matter whether the rule works because the deity will punish you if you break it, or because the tides during full moons in that bay create dangerous currents that have killed people in the past. The outcome is the same. The knowledge is preserved. The community survives. This is what we've lost, in some ways, in the transition to scientific thinking. We've gained precision. We've gained the ability to explain mechanisms. We've gained power over natural forces that would have seemed godlike to our ancestors. But we've lost the embedding of knowledge in story. We've lost the emotional weight of ritual. We've lost the community practice of passing down survival information in forms that are meaningful, memorable, and motivating. You can tell someone that the rip current at a particular beach is dangerous because of the underwater topography and the angle of the waves. And they might remember that intellectually. They might even believe you. But if you tell them a story about the spirit that lives in those waters, that takes one person every 7 years, that can only be avoided by swimming parallel to shore if you feel the pull, they'll remember that. They'll feel it. They'll act on it. This is not an argument against science. This is an argument for understanding that humans are not purely rational creatures. We're story creatures. We're meaning-making creatures. We respond to narrative and emotion and ritual in ways that pure information cannot activate. And the ocean, more than almost any other natural force, requires that kind of respect. That kind of emotional weight. Because the ocean is dangerous in ways that intellectual knowledge alone cannot prepare you for. You can know that hypothermia will kill you in cold water. You can know the exact physiological mechanisms. You can know how many minutes you have at different temperatures. But until you've felt your body shutting down in cold water, until you've experienced the way your muscles stop responding and your thoughts become sluggish and the panic gives way to a strange calm that is actually the beginning of death, until you've felt that, you don't really know. The knowledge is abstract, theoretical, not embodied. The stories, the rituals, the taboos, they were ways of embodying knowledge, of making it felt, of ensuring that people approached the ocean with appropriate fear, even if they'd never personally experienced the worst it could do. Because most people who experienced the worst of what the ocean could do didn't survive to pass on that knowledge. So the knowledge had to be transmitted culturally, had to be given weight beyond personal experience, had to be made sacred in the original sense of that word, set apart, treated with special seriousness, hedged around with rules and consequences. And this worked. For thousands of generations it worked. Coastal communities survived. They learned to take what they needed from the ocean without losing so many people that the community couldn't sustain itself. They developed sustainable fishing practices, sophisticated navigation techniques, deep understanding of local marine ecology, all embedded in religious and cultural frameworks that made the knowledge powerful enough to be preserved. Then we invented science. And we started to explain the ocean in different terms. Terms that were more accurate in some ways, more predictive, more generalizable across different environments, but also more abstract, more divorced from emotional reality, more dependent on intellectual understanding rather than embodied wisdom. And we've gained a lot from that. We've gained the ability to predict tsunamis, to understand climate patterns, to map the ocean floor, to track the movements of marine life across entire ocean basins, to develop technologies that make ocean travel safer, fishing more efficient, research more comprehensive. But we've also lost something. We've lost the cultural transmission of appropriate fear. We've lost the rituals that enforced respect. We've lost the stories that made the ocean's danger feel real to people who hadn't experienced it directly. And so now we have tourists who go swimming in conditions that would have terrified their ancestors. We have people who venture onto beaches during storms to take pictures. We have industrial fishing operations that treat the ocean as an infinite resource, that take and take and take without the cultural frameworks that once enforced sustainable practices. We have forgotten, in some deep way, what the ocean is. We've stripped away the mythology and the ritual, and we think we've replaced it with something better. With rational understanding, with scientific knowledge, with technological mastery. But the ocean doesn't care about our knowledge, doesn't care about our technology. And the fear our ancestors felt, the fear that kept them alive, that fear was accurate. It was appropriate. It was, in the deepest sense, wise. And we've lost it. Or we've relegated it to the edges of consciousness. To the occasional moment of vertigo when we look out at the horizon and feel small. To the nightmare of drowning. To the news story about the tragedy that seems incomprehensible. How could they not have known? How could they have been so careless? But we're the careless ones. We're the ones who have lost the appropriate relationship with the ocean. Who have lost the cultural technology for maintaining respect across generations. Who have replaced embodied wisdom with abstract knowledge and thought we were making progress. Maybe we were. Maybe we are. Progress is real. Science is powerful. Technology has saved countless lives. But something has been lost. Something important. Something we might need to recover if we're going to survive the next phase of our relationship with the ocean. Because that relationship is changing. The ocean is changing. In response to what we've done. In response to the carbon we've pumped into the atmosphere, the heat we've trapped, the chemistry we've altered. The ocean is absorbing the consequences of our actions. And it's changing in ways that will reshape human civilization. The sea level is rising. Not metaphorically. Not hypothetically. Measurably. Documentably. Unavoidably. The ice is melting. The water is warming. The volume is expanding. And the ocean is rising. Slowly. Steadily. Indifferently. And it will keep rising. For decades. For centuries. Regardless of what we do now. Because we've already changed the system. We've already set processes in motion that have their own momentum, their own timeline, their own physics. The ocean is rising. And millions of people live at the coast. Billions of people depend on coastal ecosystems. Entire nations exist on islands that will be underwater within the lifetime of children alive today. And we know this. Scientifically. We can measure it. We can model it. We can predict with reasonable accuracy what will happen and when. But do we feel it? Do we really understand it? Do we have the emotional framework, the cultural practices, the embodied wisdom to respond to this crisis with the seriousness it requires? Or have we lost that? Have we become so divorced from appropriate fear, so confident in our technological mastery, so abstract in our relationship with the ocean, that we cannot respond to it as the existential threat it actually is? These are not rhetorical questions. These are questions that will determine the shape of human civilization for the next 1,000 years. Because the ocean is not going to stop rising. Not on human timescales. Not in ways that we can prevent with any technology we currently possess. We've changed the system. And now we have to live with the consequences. And the ocean, indifferent as always, will simply continue being what it has always been. A vast, powerful force operating according to physical laws that don't care about human plans or human hopes or human survival. Our ancestors understood this. They lived with this understanding every day. They built their lives around the knowledge that the ocean was greater than they were, that it could not be controlled, that survival meant respect and adaptation and humility. And we need to remember that. Need to recover that wisdom. Not by abandoning science, but by complementing it. By remembering that knowledge without appropriate emotional weight is not enough. By creating new cultural frameworks for maintaining respect across generations. By telling new stories that make the danger feel real, that encode survival knowledge in forms that people will remember and act on and pass down to their children. The ocean is still there. Still powerful. Still indifferent. Still operating on scales that dwarf human concerns. And we are still at the edge. Still small. Still temporary. still fundamentally vulnerable to forces beyond our control. The only question is whether we'll remember this, whether we'll carry forward the ancient wisdom, whether we'll approach the ocean with the respect it deserves and demands, or whether we'll keep pretending we're bigger than we are. Keep pretending that technology has made us safe. Keep pretending that we can keep doing what we're doing without consequence. The ocean will answer that question for us. Eventually. It always does. The waves keep coming. They've always kept coming. They're coming now. And we're standing at the edge, just like our ancestors did 160,000 years ago, feeling the same fear, asking the same questions, making the same choices. The only difference is that now, we have the power to change the ocean itself. To warm it, to acidify it, to fill it with plastic and chemicals and the waste products of our civilization. But we still don't have the power to control it. And that's the lesson. That's what the ocean has been trying to teach us all along. You are small. Your power is limited. Your time is brief. And there are forces in the world that are greater than you will ever be. Respect them. Learn from them. Take what you need. Give back what you can. But never ever forget what they are capable of. The ocean is rising. Are we listening?